Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for watching my presentation. I'm excited to show what I've been working in class. This was an assignment that I actually did just this semester during the first 8 weeks, and it's about abortion access, so I'm really excited. All right. And so I did the class for the class Methods of Social Policy Analysis. I analyzed Idaho's laws and regulations regarding abortion access. I communicated the importance of abortion access for women's autonomy and pregnant people's autonomy. I advocated for changes in Idaho laws so people could gain better access, and I hypothetically contacted stakeholders to impact lasting change. All right, so this kind of gets into some fun topics about the overall health of the mother, which is kind of why Idaho's getting a lot of bad rap right now, and I think for justified reasons. So when Roe v. Wade was overturned, Idaho put a trigger law in place, and it banned nearly all abortions except very few expectations. And in those expectations, they they only wanted it to be for rape, incest, or the life of the mother was at risk, not the overall health of the mother. And so that caused a lot of problems because, people would get pregnancies that were dangerous if they kept continuing to develop, but Idaho would not allow an abortion in the state. And so a lot of people are arguing that it has violated their rights and they have to flee the state to get any sort of adequate care regarding that. And so the Biden administration is not very happy with Idaho right now. They've clearly stated that these abortions are covered under the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, which is EMTALA, and it would override state law. Idaho, however, is fighting them in the Supreme Court, saying we haven't done anything wrong. We're doing great. It's you guys that are the problem, and not Idaho and what they're doing. So anyway, this project will take you through the 10 competencies of social work, and we start, of course, with competency number 1, which is demonstrating ethical and professional behavior. And I thought a really good way to, demonstrate those things was to identify stakeholders and show that like I'm doing active research in who's like a really important figure in this debate. So Josh Turner, he's the lawyer defending Idaho against the Biden administration. He has stated that Idaho is in complete compliance with EMTALA and that nothing in the act prevents the state's power to regulate medicine. And that's what he's arguing, that it's regulating medicine with this abortion access issue. All right, and this is Elizabeth Prelogar. She's arguing the Idaho strict abortion ban, when it comes to emergency care, can be ended. She's fought for abortion rights several cases before. She's explained the severity of reducing access to people who become pregnant. She's a powerful ally just because she really knows what she's talking about. And she's kind of debating in the Supreme Court right now as well, trying to give people like some really good informative knowledge about like the consequences of these laws that states put in. All right, and of course, can't go without talking about Brett Kavanaugh, right? One of our favorite justices. He's suspected of voting against the abortion clarifications in EMTALA. He's questioned John Turner in a favorable manner when they were debating. And so people are speculating, or at that time were speculating, that he was going to vote in Idaho's favor. So that's why I put him down as one of the stakeholders. And here we go, another favorite Supreme Court justice. This is Justice Alito, and he is not expected to vote in favor of the Biden administration at all and side with Idaho instead. He has a very long history of opposing abortion rights. He's the one who drafted the appeal for Roe v. Wade. And then he states that it seems that the plain meaning is that the hospital must try to eliminate any immediate threat to the child, but performing an abortion is anti-ethical to that duty. So you can kind of see where his stances are on those things. And then my last stakeholder that I identified was Alexis McGill Johnson, and she's the president of Planned Parenthood. She argues for abortion access to all pregnant people. She's been advocating against Idaho's strict ban on abortion, and she's like raised funds, she's lobbied and pushed campaigns in government that restrict the growing laws in the conservative-led states that are reducing abortion access. All right, and so after I identified all these stakeholders, I decided that I wanted to choose Planned Parenthood due to their engagement in advocacy on this matter, and then they also have the funding and the ability to actually make widespread change and push for that. And I decided in this letter that I wrote, which was a part of the project, I decided to target what Idaho's regulations meant for women and pregnant people. I also talked about a specific case that occurred in Idaho, which really brought these issues to light and gave an awareness of it. So this is just an excerpt from the paper that I wrote. And this goes over the story of Jen. Jen and her husband were excited to welcome another baby into their Boise, Idaho home and give their first child a brother. However, it was not long before she had found out that her fetus had a disorder called Turner syndrome. This would usually cause a miscarriage, but in Adkins' case, the pregnancy continued to develop. The doctors explained she could get a disease called Muir syndrome. This causes edema, high blood pressure, and preeclampsia, which is all life-threatening if the pregnancy continued. Adkins was told that unless she was actively dying in her immediate life, not health, was at risk, the doctors could not do anything for her without facing fines and prison time. So she traveled and received her essential care at an abortion clinic in Oregon. This costed her $1,500. And I think that's going to be important to remember for later in my presentation. So in Planned Parenthood mission statement, it includes the following: to help people live a full and healthy lives, provide the high quality, inclusive, and comprehensive sexual and reproductive healthcare services, and advocate for public policies that protect and expand reproductive rights and access to a full range of sexual and reproductive healthcare services. Idaho's current laws directly violate Planned Parenthood's mission. Idaho is putting women in direct risk. Many have speculated that women could lose reproductive organs, significant amount of blood, or even brain damage before her/their life is directly at risk from a pregnancy and would qualify for an abortion. So a lot of negative health outcomes that can come from this. There are 2 Planned Parenthood clinics in Idaho that can give education, protest, and even provide their direct voice/financial support on these issues. If Idaho wins, the door could be open for another conservative-driven states to place pregnant people in harm's way. So like other states that have severe restrictions would continue with that path. With Planned Parenthood support, these laws would be banned in the USA. Women would be allowed to get the reproductive care they deserve when there is a pregnancy complication that could put the mother and her/their health at risk. Let's fight together, advocate for reproductive rights in the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness for pregnant people. And that's an excerpt from the assignment, and I felt like that was extremely powerful when I wrote it. All right, and so I wanted to talk about how interacting with stakeholders demonstrates professional and ethical behavior. I think it shows a desire to work with people who are struggling within a system or community, and that just directly ties into the ethical dilemmas that we talk about, that we need to be willing to go in and work to actually challenge those. The stakeholders can see how a person is able to communicate effectively. For this, it would demonstrate communicating well through writing, because I wrote to the stakeholders, the ones identified from Planned Parenthood, and that's how I communicated with this hypothetically. And through the writing sampled in the presentation, stakeholders are aware that the individual understands the situation thoroughly, because if you don't understand what's going on, you have that knowledge and base, I don't think that they're really going to feel comfortable or feel like you're ready to work for them and with their cause. All right, and then I wanted to talk about how it demonstrates skills to interact with stakeholders. So I listed just a few: research skills, communication skills, encouraging empathy and support, and developing understanding and making connections. I would say research skills is a really big part of it, because you have to research to know the background of what's going on. You have to communicate effectively to contact the stakeholders. And I think encouraging empathy, like when you're in this kind of work, and support for disenfranchised people is really important. And then making connections, obviously, to continue to grow your cause is extremely important as well, which I feel like I demonstrated when I reached out to the stakeholders and identified them. All right, so now we're moving on to competency 2, which is advancing human rights and social, economic, and environmental justice. All right. So I decided to really focus on the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness in this. It's because Idaho is simply just violating the rights of their citizens by taking away their autonomy. This is true technically of any case of abortion, bans, but the situation becomes even more harmful when their right to their overall health is taken away for just a potential pregnancy. I kind of feel like, on a personal note, it's a little ridiculous to expect women to give up their overall health, because that directly impacts the fetus. So you would think that that would be kind of understood, but in Idaho, it doesn't, and the government there, it doesn't really seem like it is. And so also economic disadvantages. So not everyone can afford travel outside of the state to get an abortion. I mentioned in my excerpt, my writing sample, that it cost her $1,500 to travel to Oregon to get an abortion. Not everybody can afford that. And some people aren't electing an abortion because they can't afford children, and forcing children in a pregnancy and medical bills on them is not going to help. In 2014, 49% of abortion patients had a family income below the federal poverty level. And I just think this is all really matters for economic disadvantages and everything. It just really impacts it. And so just moving on to engaging in anti-racism, because it kind of ties into that struggle with the economics as well. Just wanted to talk about that more than 60% of those who seek abortions are people of color. Women of color face more structural barriers from the start of a pregnancy, and this includes after a pregnancy as well. Those inequities become more severe when abortion bans diminish their power and their bodily autonomy. People of color have less access to contraception, and BIPOC people are more likely to face unsafe conditions during and after a pregnancy. They are 3 times more likely to die during a pregnancy, and because of these disparities, women of color are more likely to need life-saving abortions, including in the event of an ectopic pregnancy. And so when you're really thinking about what Idaho's doing, it's really hindering to BIPOC people and their choices. 31.9% of Idaho identifies as BIPOC or non-white. Due to Idaho's strict policies, it's disproportionately affecting people of color and targeting them. And just severe changes need to be made to lessen the impact on this particular community, especially considering we know, like in the article that I was reading that references this, it talks a lot about how a lot of BIPOC people also live in poverty and they're underrepresented. And so it comes full circle into a fact that they are also further disenfranchised by the fact that more of them are in poverty and are struggling with that kind of thing. And now they're forced to have a pregnancy and have challenging pregnancies. It just really compiles against them in a really unfair way. And so now we're talking about how engaging in anti-racism informs knowledge. So being aware of BIPOC struggles ensures that anti-racism is being considered an advocacy. And I'd consider that a knowledge base because it informs how you're participating in advocacy and might inform how you're changing up and being more inclusive to those groups. It allows those BIPOC values to be explored regarding their history. And it can really consider how historical trauma regarding bodily autonomy has not been respected throughout time. And I think this is important to talk about just because there were a lot of people who were slaves who had to have children and then have those children as slaves back in the day. And then you also look at the Native Americans and how a lot of them were like sterilized and having their autonomy taken away. And that really does impact the feeling of not having control over your own body, even when you're having a pregnancy, even when it's sterilization versus having a pregnancy that you don't want to have. And so I would say that all of that informs like the historical trauma and just keeps reinforcing it when you have severe bans like this. All right, and so I wanted to move on to informed research and research-informed practice. And Idaho, so this was really fun when I was researching this. Idaho has a distinct lack of information on those who have abortions, while Roe v. Wade was supported in the legislature. They did not take any records on poverty level, reason for the abortion, education level, or housing arrangements. And so this is just a lot of information not to have when you're going to implement laws at kind of the snap of a finger and let a trigger law go through. They didn't even know what like a distinct number on how many women were getting abortions or if they were due to health complications. And so I just feel like this was really, really irresponsible of Idaho to just go ahead and do stuff without having the proper information and knowledge base to do it. All right. And then when I was also researching this, I realized Utah had a really similar thing that Idaho was going on. And I live on the Utah-Idaho border, so I get to kind of see both worlds in a little way. In Utah, the government seems to care more about their citizens' rights because they had a trigger law that was similar. But they put it on hold. They were like, whoa, this is unconstitutional and it needs to be voted upon more recently than something that might have come out in around the 80s, my estimation. And so Now abortion is allowed in Utah up to 18 weeks of pregnancy, unless there are other complications. And they also have always had, they have always had in more recent years, like things for health of the mother, which is something Idaho doesn't have. They are not expecting women and pregnant people to just sacrifice their health, their bodies, and everything for the sake of a pregnancy. All right. And so I decided to talk about how this went into the cognitive and affective processes, because I feel like before, when I did a lot of research, I would kind of let the author tell me what the research was about and kind of imply it, and then I learned from it. And I feel like a lot of people do that in master's programs. However, I just read the raw data from Idaho and that's what they collected, and I was just like, this is not enough information to be passing laws like this. And so it just allowed me to conclude that they just didn't have enough information to do this law without having serious ethical dilemmas. And I was able to think about the differences between Utah and Idaho and the reactions to the trigger law and overturning Roe v. Wade. And it just made me really think of that Idaho and other states that are doing similar things are not really thinking about who they're representing and where their citizens are at right now, when they're just extremely outdated laws going through. All right, engaging in policy practice. So as I continued through the project, I decided to start looking into what policies could be put in place that would completely solve the United States problems with the abortion ban. And it led me into some historical research about the Equal Rights Amendment, or the ERA. It would guarantee abortion access, like early abortion access, as a right. And that was my long-term solution that I found. And a short-term solution would be that Idaho could look at Utah's example and just decide to place the trigger law on hold until people can vote on the matter. I also found that there was another solution, but it's also temporary. They could just agree with the Biden administration. However, that can be flipped at a dime depending on who's in office and what political party. So it really doesn't guarantee rights at all for anybody. And so that's why I was just like, oh, we need a permanent solution. We need the ERA. And so here's an excerpt from my project again. Even if the Supreme Court sides with the Biden administration understanding of EMTALA protections, it does not guarantee rights for women or pregnant people. EMTALA can be defined by whoever is president at the time. Therefore, even if the Supreme Court sides with the Biden administration, that does not guarantee every president will support those same rights in the future. It becomes clear that the only way to ensure pregnancy rights and abortion access is to place it in the U.S. Constitution. During the 1970s, there was an attempt to ensure abortion access for women through the Equal Rights Amendment. It received severe backlash and was only ratified 20 years after being introduced, pushing past the expiration date. Since overturning Roe v. Wade, 5 states have rescinded their ratification. The ERA needs 35 states to ratify. To resolve the abortion ban problems and unconstitutional behaviors among several states, not just Idaho, the ERA would need to be ratified and Congress would need to propose it through the legislative branch of government with 2/3 of a vote. Only then would abortion be a guaranteed right for women. All right, and so that's kind of the policy that I picked to wrap that up in a nice bow, like this would be the way to solve these issues permanently. And now we're going to talk about engaging with individuals, families, groups, organizations, communities, etc. And I really decided to focus more on community because I feel like that's more of a larger problem in Idaho. Okay. And that gets into communities and then widespread communities, and it just kind of builds on each other. But community education centers really could be utilized in Idaho and rural communities to promote outreach and assistance to people who are living there regarding these bans. It would also be able to challenge traditional conservative attitudes while also providing a safe and supportive atmosphere for people who are thinking about getting an abortion or who have gotten one. It would also be able to give suggestions, referrals, or other needed services in the state where abortions are so strictly regulated and people do not always have the information or can't get the information. So I kind of thought that would be a really good way to engage in the community and individuals to kind of work with them, restore rights, challenge negative mindsets. All right, now assessing individuals, families, groups, and communities. Whew. Once again, kind of targeting a little bit wider of an audience, but I really think that assessing and stuff, people and attitudes would be a really good opportunity for Idaho and their governing bodies to gather data on abortion in Idaho and why people have gotten one. If you don't have the information now, maybe getting it would also be a very helpful way to inform the approaches that are made in government. That's my thought process. I think anonymous surveys could be sent out by mail or electronically. I think questions could focus on attitudes, if the individual has gotten an abortion or knows someone who has, and why they got one. If they do not know someone or have not gotten an abortion, there could also be an option where they check mark or list the reasons they believe people got one. And I think that would also be very interesting just to kind of take the information around and analyze it. All right, now we're doing intervening with individuals, families, groups, and communities. And so in Idaho, fortunately, it is not illegal for practitioners, mental health or physical health, to refer clients for abortion services. So it's convenient that I do live on the Utah-Idaho border, because if somebody is talking about their frustrations with the Idaho ban, I can refer them to services outside of the state. And the closest Planned Parenthood is to us is in Logan, Utah, which is only about 30 minutes away. That still can be a drive for some people who don't have that access to resources, but it's much better than a lot of places in Idaho that live several hours away from a Planned Parenthood. And so when we're talking about evaluating practice, I decided to go ahead and look more of an internal reflection into myself, because I haven't really hidden that I grew up Mormon. And so, and since I haven't been able to work in anything related to abortion care, my opportunities on this topic are limited. So that's why I decided to evaluate just myself and my biases. I have not been, so being raised Mormon did affect my worldview. I often heard messages about abortion was selfish and like murder. There's very few reasons why the Mormon Church will allow abortion for their members. This project, though, as I reflected growing up Mormon, and now it still affects me today, and I would say that it still does. And I've been analyzing abortion in a way that's my worldview, with my rights and my perspective. And I didn't really think about BIPOC individuals and like what they've experienced and the history that kind of compounded against them in this kind of topic. I'd never have had to be like, my people have never been sterilized. My people have never been forced to have pregnancies to keep children in the slave labor. And so in that way, I didn't really understand until I was researching it, the level of like harm and extra harm that it does because of the compounding factors of historical trauma. And so when I'm thinking about how to change my practice and just analyzing myself, I need to specifically look out for the BIPOC perspectives in these issues, especially with abortion bans. And I'd like to hear from that community and that group, if I'm talking about these lasting changes, like what they want to be done, what they want things to be different, how they'd implement it, because they're the ones that are really suffering the most from a lot of these bans. All right, last competency. Okay. So as we know, this is a long one, but it's apply forms of leadership to support collaborative, interdisciplinary, or transdisciplinary relationships, and active community participation in addressing the intersection of local and global issues impacting your community and greater geographic region. And so when I was thinking about like the United States altogether, and how many states have this abortion ban or similar ones, or like really restricting it and that kind of a thing, it reminded me, like I started like thinking about other countries and their approaches. And I immediately was reminded, like thought of Iceland, because I had heard in the past just that they had really good women's rights. And so I kind of like compared it a little bit, because the women's rights in the movies of this, like in the movement of the 70s, everybody thinks here of it very much in an America only lens. But there were a lot of countries that were experiencing this uprise from women who were like ready to do cultural change. And they were actually vastly different from the US, because instead of failing to ratify the ERA within the time frame, Iceland was able to secure rights in place for women through their own governing bodies pretty quickly. It all kind of started with this huge rally that they had. A lot of women didn't go to work. A lot of women wouldn't take their children out to school or daycare or anything like that, and they just stopped. And it really sent a huge message to the governing body. And so then they put a couple of laws in place that would ensure women's equal rights with men and ensure gender equality between the two sexes. And then it also guaranteed women early access abortion care. And so because of all these policies they put in, it ranked internationally #1 on closing gender gaps in education and health. And Iceland was 87% of the way to closing gaps in all sectors, which is a lot different from other countries. And so when I thought about like applying forms of leadership and all this kinds of stuff, I decided like I had to write an op-ed piece that kind of talked to the people of Idaho and more of a broad audience to kind of inspire action. So I focused on ways in which women can combat these issues through ratifying the ERA, much like Iceland has done with their own laws. And I spoke on impact that these policies have on women and pregnant individuals and their autonomy. So here's another excerpt from my assignment. It's time for Idaho's government to start being held accountable for their actions and decisions. It is time for the women and pregnant people to be heard and their rights to be totally and completely assured. This is the way we can do this is by petitioning the Supreme Court to uphold the Biden's administration of EMTALA, petitioning the government to support Equal Rights Amendment. Idaho can give women back their rights. They have every ability to place trigger law on hold and vote in it in their own courts. Idaho could also side with the Biden administration's understanding of EMTALA. This would secure pregnant people's right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which is something that I talk a lot about. However, even if Idaho does agree with EMTALA, where the Supreme Court sides with the Biden administration, it could still be taken away by a different president with a different understanding of EMTALA, as I mentioned before. Women of Idaho, think about what these laws do to you, your loved ones, and how archaic, outdated laws are not the way to supervise or control citizens. Let's take back our rights and petition in this government. And so I kind of wanted to talk about the values that I learned from overall in this entire assignment, because I went over knowledge, skills, cognitive, and affective processes. So this is some stuff that I learned and some things that I did believe before. But a bodily autonomy is a human right. Violations of bodily autonomy are enforced pregnancy, further harm people in BIPOC communities. Having severe abortion bans prevent people from getting adequate care. And so some of the values are uphold an individual's right to make decisions for their health and body, period. Protect BIPOC people from further trauma, and having care is a human right, and having health care. All right. And so now I thought I'd get to your guys' questions. So when working, so this is Professor Raymer's questions. I was gonna do his first. When working in rural contexts, how do you find common grounds with partners or clients, even when you don't seem to share the same values? And I really think it kind of comes to the individual respect of each person and their interests and who they are. I think you can find I think you can find common ground with anybody by just respect and honesty, kindness, that kind of a thing, respect of their rights and counseling and their lived experiences. And I feel like just a simple like code of conduct is a great way to relate to people. You discuss the importance of trauma-informed care several times in your narrative, but what are the one or two most important things you've integrated into your practice to make it more trauma-informed? Whew, that is definitely a loaded question that I've been thinking about. I think it's kind of like understanding the background of where the client is coming from. And kind of just assuming that there's probably some struggle or some trauma when somebody comes in the room with you and starts working with you. And so I think like just automatically being on the cautious side of that, so that way people feel like you're building that rapport and starting to talk about their stories and things like that. You've already started from a trauma-informed process because you're allowing people that space to become comfortable and you're already aware and kind of treating them like there's struggle going on. And I think trauma can be a lot of other things than just severe events. It can be little things that stack up or instances of not being heard or listened to. And so I think just treat everybody like, I don't want to be like treat everybody like they have trauma, but I think approaching everybody like with the idea that they have potential trauma is a really great way to do that, and it helps build rapport a lot faster. Okay. Now here's Colton's questions. He wants me to provide examples of interventions that I have engaged in to advocate for your clients and ensure their team support system for using person-centered approaches. I had a client last year who made significant improvements from one year to the next. And this client had really wanted to go to Lagoon and do these things. Even though he'd had some missing days, it was still a significant improvement from that year before. So we set up a system where we were like going to work really hard with the assignments and work with his teachers and make up some time. And I was able to advocate to the principal how he deserved to be there and how he deserved to have his goals and dreams be listened to as well, even though he doesn't have the same ability as other people. And I think that's really what it came down to, was understanding that this person was excelling with where they were, even though when you compared them to a neurotypical student, they were not. And so I think just kind of advocating for people who have differences, for clients who have differences, and kind of trying to humanize them in the eyes of the system. I think that's how I'd say advocating for your clients happens. And I think ensuring their team support and system support would just be including teachers on your thought processes and what you're noticing, and talking to the other coworkers who work with him and be like, yeah, let's, like, he really wants to do this. Let's try to help him with this. And going forth and just doing advocacy, working with people as a team, and kind of giving in seeds of inside perspective to people who may not be used to working with neurodivergent people. And so, in the interest of practicing a strengths-based approach to social services, could you mention any strengths in the community that may have in these areas that they could build upon moving forward? I think the community is extremely passionate, and I feel like that can definitely be used as a good trajectory for creating lasting change. And I think the community is well tight and well knit, and in a way that can cause a lot of challenges, but in another way, that's a really good strength for including people in the community and helping them feel welcome. And so I feel like when we're looking at these challenges that we want to change, like anti-racism, Greater Idaho concept, things like that, and the racist undertones of it, I think community education, like I mentioned in my paper and in the presentation, is a great step. But then when we get the community to be on board with that, I feel like it would be very easy to overcome those challenges because they'd be so willing to accept help and lend their services to other people. And we are a very service oriented community in many ways. And so I think that would be the strengths for sure when we're talking about creating that change. All right, Professor Wiltfong. How did or does your upbringing in the LDS church system and decision to leave the church inform your practice in the various placements or opportunities you've had? I think it's definitely given me a broader perspective of people. I felt like when I was Mormon, it was very much living in a bubble. This is the only place that will work for you or anybody, and this is the way people have to live. And now that I've been out of the church system and it didn't work for me, and I see how it doesn't work for everybody, especially for people who are BIPOC, because the church has done some racist things in the past. They've supported the Native American schools, which, like, when they rounded up children and things like that. And it's just, you look at these things and you just know, like, I can't say that this lifestyle or any lifestyle can be right for this person. This person has their own lived experiences, they have their own intuition and know about themselves enough to go and do what they need to do. It's just getting a little support along the way. And so I think that's kind of how it's informed my perspective. Is I knew what it was like to grow up being like, this is the only way to live and it's the only way you're going to be happy. And it wasn't. And so why would I know that for other people? And so that's kind of how I do it, is I really put an emphasis on listening to the client's lived experiences and what they want for their lives. And 2 to 3 things that supervision helped me understand and overcome in my journey. Whew, that's a pretty good one. I feel like I got a lot of helpful supervision from the program director, who's actually Colton, in their committee. I often and frequently asked him for advice, and I feel like he always gave good advice. Like, I remember one time we really struggled with sometimes with some of the aides, the teachers' aides in the school, and he just mentioned, like, make sure to treat aides and teachers like their clients, because it's just like come down to treating people with a fundamental respect to build rapport, to all work in a system to help the client out. And so I really feel like that helped me knit some good relationships with the aides that I previously was struggling with. And I was able to listen to them, and then they were able to listen to me, and it did a really good back and forth, overcoming challenges kind of situation. Let's see, a second one for supervision. Let's see. Sorry, it's slipped my mind. I think the stages of change was something that was really good for me to notice what, like, specific place a client was at, and if they were, like, wanting to kind of stay where they were when they were ready for the next change, and then talking about that. We talked a lot about, like, what clients look like when they shut down. There's green light, yellow light, red light. And do not push a client through when they're in a red light mood, because it'll just cause snappiness and challenges, and you're pushing them too much. And that's not good for the rapport or that client or that teaching learning experience from client to practitioner. And so I feel like those 2 things have helped me overcome the most, because I feel like you kind of see it in the school a lot where people feel like they have authoritarian attitudes over kids, and that's not really how you're supposed to be. And so I feel like when I first went in, it was just like kind of like, oh, you know, that's the norm and it shouldn't be. And so just learning about green light, yellow light, red light is how we called it at the practicum. And like if a client's green, they're ready to hear a suggestion. If they're yellow, it's like, oh, proceed with caution, but you don't want to push them into red. And when they're in red, you kind of just help them get through a crisis mode. You don't push them into having a light bulb moment because you can't do that. So that's what I really think I learned a lot. All right, well, everybody, here is my references. And there's actually quite a few pages of it, so I'll go through it, but here's one that you can scan through quickly. And then here's the next one. Like I said, lots of references. And then I put art references as well for the art that I used, but thank you guys, everybody, so much. I really am glad that you were able to watch my presentation, and I'm looking forward to hearing more of your feedback. Thank you guys. Bye.